Welcome in, Doug. How are you? Hunt and Paul, welcome in. How's everybody doing this evening? We are starting our first episode this evening. Tara, welcome in.
No, I think you're fine. There we go. All right, there we
There
go.
we go.
How we
Good
doing?
evening, sir. How are you?
I'm good, and yourself?
Fantastic.
Excellent.
Fantastic.
What'd we do today? Anything good?
Well, we celebrated my daughter's birthday from last night. You know, we did it today, so I was trying to rush around, and I kicked some people out of my house. I was like, all right, guys, you can stay and hang out, but I'm not talking no more. I'm going live at 7 o'clock. See you guys later. And they were like, "Oh no, we're gonna head out." So
nice. Well, good. How'd that go? Good birthday party?
yeah, absolutely, it was good.
How old is she?
It was good. 19.
19. All right. Yeah, I think you told me that. I just forgot.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Rhonda, welcome in. So, if you guys are in here, if you could tap the screen, share out the live, I'd appreciate it. Maddox, welcome in. So, as you all know, we are here to start the first episode of Bar Talks with Big. And our first guest is going to be Hunt and Paul. And Hunt and Paul, if I remember correctly, we talked about it. You were a 27-year veteran of the fire service, whether it be wildland and or structural firefighting, correct?
Yeah, that's true for sure. Yeah, and
Okay.
out here we have a state Cal Fire that is just a specific, more or less more specific wildland, but we're a rural department, so we responded to pretty much everything, assist ambulances, vehicle accidents, wildland structure fires, all that sort of thing.
All right. So before we get into, the soup and nuts here, I just wanted to, if you could just give us a little bit of a rundown of what you've done, or what have you done, like the percentage or your time involved. You said 27 years, correct?
Yes, sir.
And if you can give a little bit about yourself.
Started and finished as a volunteer. I wasn't not paid. And it was certainly never about the money, because we would get $2 a call, was our reimbursement. And probably for the first, 8 years, I was, at a firefighter level. And then I became an engineer, and I just kind of rode it out as an engineer. I had the opportunity to maybe go up from there. We ran captain was our next step, but we also had some really good paid guys that, took a lot more classes and did a lot more of the technical book work. And so for me, I never had the time, or I didn't make the time, I guess I'd say. So, learned a lot from those guys over the years, but, there would be times where you'd be stuck, like an acting captain. We went on a lot of big fires, like, campaign fires and, other parts of the state. Most of it was in state, but California's a pretty big state. There's a lot of dirt out here. So.
Correct. So in your experience as acting as a captain, which aspect of the firefighting, because you've seen both sides as an acting captain and or a regular firefighter, which side would you say you preferred the best?
I prefer the firefighter side for sure. Yeah,
Right.
I anytime you could jump on a nozzle and go through the front door of a burning building,
Mm.
I would take that every day over having to sit around and give people orders on what to do next. Um, so for me, that was, because it wasn't like there was a pay difference. So for me, it
Mm.
was more about doing what I enjoyed doing.
Correct. So it was more of an enjoyment for you to be on the end of a nozzle than to give out directions
Yeah, for sure. For me.
and dictate what stuff should be done. You're
Yeah.
more of an action type of person where you wanted to get this job done and get it completed.
Yeah. And you lose some of that too as an engineer, because a lot of times you get stuck at the pump panel,
Mm.
So, but, you got to do what you got to do.
So let me ask you, in the time frame that you spent with firefighting, what was the most percentage of time that you did? Was it more wildland, or was it more structural and
Well,
mutual aid?
yeah, I think if you just looked at the sheer number of calls that we ran, medical aids were far and away, the biggest number of calls that we went to.
Okay.
And then after that, you would have had vehicle accidents. And then from there, wildland fires and structure fires were kind of a toss up. Because obviously we had 6 months of the year we weren't getting wildland fires necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
through the later fall and winter and earlier spring months. But, so there was none in those times, but you had more in the summer and earlier fall time. Compared to structure fires. And then, of course, structures were more even kind of sprinkled throughout the year.
Correct. Correct. So going back to the acting captain portion of it, how many years do you think you did as an acting captain compared to, just being a regular firefighter?
Oh, I would say it was probably only in the last 3 years that I would sometimes get stuck in that role, you know?
Okay.
So, so of the 27, maybe 3 or 4, something like
Three or
that.
four. Okay.
Yeah. That certainly doesn't mean that, in year 20, you didn't do it once or twice. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? But for me, it was more of a fill-in spot. So, being a volunteer department, you roll up there, there's no other captain showing up. So you get stuck doing that job as, a senior engineer. They
Mm-hmm.
kind of had a pecking order in there of who was
Correct.
going where, um, based on seniority was part of it, but also being able to make a decision, and hopefully make the right decision.
Absolutely. I mean, I understand. As we talked before, I am a veteran of the fire company myself,
Mhm.
and I found that I've never had to do any kind of acting captain work or anything like that. But as a, fire police captain, I've had to help them situate people for scenes, set up scenes. So I can understand your feeling on not wanting to, stick to one role and be able to just do everything that you could versus being the acting captain.
Yeah, and I guess what I would say is that I felt like we had, better qualified captains, and so
Mm.
if they were anywhere near, that's the job they should be doing. You know what I mean? So
And now that you say that, what were do you know what the qualifications were for a captain or anybody of that stature?
you know, I'm trying to remember back because it's been a while. There were a lot of command classes that they had them taking.
Hmm.
And I truthfully, I know there was a lot of classes that, they potentially would be taking, especially to get a paid position,
Hmm.
um, up there. But I do recall that there were quite a few command classes that they would want them to take, especially in a paid position. And I'm sure there were others too. I just can't think of them at the moment.
Hmm. Yeah, that's understandable.
And in fact, I really didn't pay that close attention to them because I knew I wasn't making my living there. Um,
Mhm.
you know what I'm saying? So I yeah, I would try to, give them as much time as I could, but with no paycheck coming out of there, there's, certain trade off where you also have to pay attention to your paying job.
Correct. So for the listeners or the viewers that we have coming in and out, and I just want to give a quick shout out to everybody that's in here. I appreciate everybody being here. If you could just tap the screen and share out the live, that would be amazing. I did see a couple people send out some shares, and I really appreciate that. We're talking with Hunt Paul, who's a veteran of the fire service for 27 years, and we're just kind of going over it a little bit and have him explain a little bit from what he's seen and what could be expected for people that don't know what the fire service is, which leads me up to the next thing I want to discuss with you is what is the requirements for your state to be a firefighter in any situation? Is there a lot of testing, or I mean a lot of classes? I know
Well,
for New York,
mhm,
we're required. Um, there's 5 or 6 main classes that we have to take in order to be a firefighter, and to continue on, we had um, a lot of refresher courses, I should say, to keep us
sure,
going along.
sure. So, you know, I think the departments set, individual departments set the standards of what their requirements are going to be. By today's standards, there's a lot of people applying for those jobs. So, you're going to for sure be an EMT, and you're going to have a variety of, like our local junior college has a pretty good fire program, and a lot of the people in our area run through those multiple different classes that they had. And it's changed a lot since I got in. And so there's a lot of things that I was sort of grandfathered in under that changed after I already had my foot in the door.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but, because when I first started, it was a lot of, I mean, there was a lot of, classroom work inside
Mm-hmm.
our firehouse itself. You know what I mean? We had
Correct.
drill nights, and there would be specific things that they would have you learning to do that were being trained by our department ourselves. And then, we would have our own training officer, and you would have to meet certain standards. How fast could you put on an air pack, and how fast could you lay 200 feet of wildland hose, and you had to be decent. I mean, you had to have practiced it enough that you could do it smoothly,
Correct.
uh, and efficiently and quickly. Um, so now, though, I'm sure now starting, I don't necessarily think it's state mandated, but like I said, the departments do have their own criteria, I'm sure, for classes that you have to take.
Mm-hmm. So when you started in the fire service, were they still using the 3/4 boots and the long turnout coats, or was it a full turnout gear?
No, we had, it was, yeah, no, when I started, we were going into the yellow Nomex,
Mm-hmm.
just like a regular stretcher coat, and then like overall bibs, kind of
Okay.
style. So your core was kind of double layered,
Okay.
um, probably from mid chest down,
Okay.
with the jacket being over kind of thing. And then we just ran regular, I would say full height boots. And actually later on, like maybe year 20 after being in there, we went back to 3/4 leather topped boots, which was
Okay.
odd. We kind of, I think maybe I got in about the time they were going to full height, like just below your knee height.
Correct.
And then we ended up changing back to like 2/3 up your shin height, was kind of a softer topped boot.
Correct. I know when I was in, I was using the 2/3 boot, like you were saying, that it comes up to the middle of your shin, that were leather. and also we had the long turnout coats, but we also had the bib style uh, turnout pants and the leather lids.
Right.
So and what I mean by leather lids are the firefighter helmets that we have to wear.
Yeah. Yep. That's what I
Um,
have. And up here, because they would supply you with the plastic one,
Correct,
and if you wanted a leather one, you'd just have to buy your own.
correct. Well, and the leather lids, they're pretty pricey.
Hmm.
So when we used the plastic ones mostly, but the or not the plastic, but the composite or whatever material they were making them out of. To
Sure.
order a leather lid was like $600 for the New
Yep.
Yorker,
Yep.
and
And then you still had to get the front
the
shield
emblem plate,
for it.
yeah, the shield. So yeah, that's quite a bit of what we did. And I know we had to take a lot of refresher courses. Did you guys have to take a lot of refresher courses to maintain
Yeah.
active status?
Even you would all the time you would have, or I say all the time, let's say yearly, you for sure had CPR updates. If you were an EMT, you had your EMT updates, the continuing ed on all those things, where you obviously would get tested for your skills, just to make sure you haven't forgot what you were supposed to be doing, kind of thing.
Correct. So let's run through a drill scenario. A typical drill night? What would that be for you? For people that don't know what goes on in the fire service. So what a typical drill would be for you guys on a, say we had Wednesday nights. So what would a typical drill night be for you?
Well, let's say we were in a stretch of doing like auto extrication and
Mm,
auto fire. So we would usually do that a few nights in a row because we'd get wrecked cars, bring them to have them towed to our firehouse, and then maybe the first night we were working on getting patients because we drilled on Thursday nights. So
okay.
the first series of nights you might be working on, extricating somebody from a car, getting them on a longboard, getting neck collar, getting control of their head.
Mm,
And then, maybe the next week, you would start cutting the cars. You know what I'm saying? Rolling the
mm,
dash off, putting the rams, cutting the rockers and the A post, taking the windshield out and putting those rams in between the B post and pushing the front end off the car. Like if somebody had their feet jammed under the pedals or, there was a lot of front end damage and the
mm,
car was pushed on them. And then the third, we might, in the early days, we used to get a lot of dirty lacquer thinner, used lacquer thinner. I don't want to say dirty,
mm.
used lacquer thinner, and other products like that. And then we would by then the cars were getting pretty cut up, and then they'd light them on fire. And for the third drill in that series, you'd come in and be putting out the fire on the vehicles.
Okay.
So that could be like 3 different nights, but in 3 weeks in a row where you're working with vehicles. And then then maybe then from there you move into wildland for a month or something. And it starts out with cutting hand line, and you're learning which tool. Are you running the McLeod, the Pulaski, a chainsaw, how a group of guys can work together, cutting a hand fire line where everybody, you take out, if there's 6 guys in your crew, you're removing 1/6 of the fuel, and the guy behind you takes some out, and by the
Mm,
last guy, he's cleanup, and you have your line cut. You know what I mean? And you're just
absolutely.
your timing on working together as a unit, so you're not leaving somebody behind, or you're not getting stacked up on top of the guy ahead of you. And
Mm,
then then from there you might, the next week it would be evolutions off an engine, where you'd come in and throw on wildland hose packs, and you might lay 600 or 800 feet from the engine with a 3-man crew, because everybody's got a couple 100 feet on their back plus the 150 that you pull out of the cross lay on the engine.
mm.
You're working up a predetermined route. And then
Okay.
we would get lucky, and we had an Indian reservation not too far away that they would let us come out and burn off part of that res every year, and it would be 4 foot tall dry grass that would haul along at a pretty good pace, and you'd get to practice lay in line trying to catch it or pump and run, things like
Okay.
that.
So let's circle back for a minute. You were talking about a Pulaski tool.
Uh-huh.
What could you explain what the Pulaski tool is for people that don't know?
Yeah, well, so let's see. So the Pulaski is like an axe on one side and an axe head not as sharp, but turned at a 90-degree angle on the other side on
Hmm.
like an axe handle. And that guy was usually, there was a couple of those guys in front because they would be chopping up a little bit heavier brush to get it cleared, and also starting to break up the soil to get, grass off of it.
Okay.
Um, so again, one side looked just like an axe and the other was like an axe turned perpendicular to it off the back side of the handle. And so
Okay.
depending what you were doing would determine which way you turn the head.
So in other words, it's almost like a thin hoe, like a long blade hoe on one side and
Yeah.
an axe head on the other side. So it was
Yeah.
both of them connected to a handle.
Yep.
Okay.
And it was heavy like an axe, as far as the thickness of the steel. So it was for, hitting harder items. And then the
Good.
McLeods would come behind them, which were, basically the guy with the McLeod is now taking out that grass and the lighter fuels.
Hmm.
And that's more like probably a foot wide on one side with like a hoe style cutting blade. And
Okay.
then the other side of that tool, the back side where you could roll it over, was like a bunch of forks, that had points on them. If you had stringy stuff that you were trying to, hook onto to get it out of there.
Okay. So it's like a triangle rake, like a bigger triangle rake.
The tooth,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
yes,
the tooth on it. Okay,
yes.
we used to call those council rakes.
Council rakes. Okay, got it.
Yeah, we used to call them council rakes. And that was another thing, like you said, to get the sod out of the way, to get it down to the dirt.
Yep.
And now with the wildland firefighters, how wide of a, so you were saying about a foot wide is what you would do for like a fire break?
No, that depended on the height of the fuel.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so you could be 2 to 3 times the height of the fuel. So your fire line would change as you were moving along. You know what I mean? You
Okay.
could be in 3 foot tall grass and you're cutting a 6 foot wide break. You know what I'm saying?
Break. Okay. Yeah.
So
So for people who don't know, a fire break is getting rid of the fuel source for a fire that's burning up to that area.
yeah,
So you want to get everything out of there, the underbrush, the sod, the grass, the trees, whatever. Clear that section out. So hopefully it contains the fire to just that area that is not burnt already. So usually I know we did it about 5 to 10 feet past where the original fire was,
mhm,
and then started doing that fire break as much as we could. Then we would start bringing in heavy machinery, bulldozers, skid skiers and stuff like that to try to help build that break faster compared to everybody doing it by hand.
right. Yeah.
So,
So we were kind of the same thing with just mostly dozers is what they use out here um,
mhm.
for clearing. I mean, unless it's hell, I've seen guys, using a box scraper on the back of their wheel tractor if it's your house that's getting ready to burn down. You know what I mean?
Correct,
So,
correct, correct,
but
and I agree. And so on the back to the hose that you were saying, sometimes you do drills where you stretch out wildland hose. What kind of hose was that? Was that like one
that was an
inch?
inch and a half single jacket.
Yeah, okay.
And then every couple lengths, there would be a T built, a T on one of the threaded coupler ends,
Mhm.
so that when you come back to mop up, you can still use that line. And then you'd have 1 inch laterals that you could come off of to start mopping up, once you maybe got the fire hooked and
Okay.
and you started your mop up procedure, you would just use that same line for getting water out there and then just tee into it. So you didn't have to break it apart, basically,
Correct. Correct. So you could tee off in so many so many distances.
Right.
Now, another question I would ask is, I just lost my train of thought. Hey, we were talking about it and I just forgot. But yeah, so we used to do the same thing here with, a lot of the same things. We also did a lot of pump drills. Did you guys
Sure.
do a lot of pump drills?
Yeah, we did. Now, the one thing we didn't do much of that a lot of other places do is for us, we ran mostly water tenders if we didn't have hydrants. And in a lot of these rural departments, there may be a lot of areas that don't have hydrants. We never really set up a portable pit, and drafted out of it. In our
Okay.
county, other departments did that, but we did not.
Okay.
So we did not do, I mean, most of the time, if we were drafting, it would be like on a wildland fire out of a creek, something
Okay.
like that.
Yeah,
Versus,
I know. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, yeah, that was it.
I know here we usually do, if there's no draft site nearby,
Mhm.
we usually tend to drop the drop tank and fill it, and have trucks come in, fill the tank, have one engine sitting there sucking from that drop tank to
Sure.
push water up to wherever the scene would be.
Got it.
And
Sure.
that would suffice for enough water. But we would also call in mutual aid companies to haul water if they had tankers available.
Sure. Yeah. So that's pretty much, instead of us dropping a tank, we would park a water tender, let's say at the bottom of a driveway, and there's an engine up top that
Mhm.
laid the line coming in, and he would sort of be that drop tank. You know what I'm
Okay.
saying? He would take in water from incoming. You might drop a clappered Y or something down the hill, and water tenders would pull up and pump to him, and then
Mhm.
he would relay pump on up the hill, kind of thing.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah.
Excuse me. So, speaking of relays and water tenders, what's the most companies that you've seen on a scene, show up for something?
Oh geez. Hell, I mean, some of these big wildland fires out here, damn, there could be 800 different engines out. I mean, a huge, not 800, but several hundred. You know what I
Correct.
mean? And a
Correct.
big group of them out here might be Cal Fire's trucks, but then, every little department sends one engine or one water tender, whether it's a Type 1 engine, a Type 3 engine, a Type 4 engine, whatever it is they're calling for. You
Mhm.
know. So, locally, like if it was just a house fire in our department, we would probably have 3 or 4 other departments that would either send an engine or a water tender.
Okay.
And unless we had something else going, most of the time it was water tenders because, we'd already have 2 or 3 engines on the scene by the time they were showing up because they were coming from a distance.
Correct. Correct. Now, can you explain a little bit of Type 1 engine, Type 2, Type 3, Type 4, engines you were describing a minute ago?
So yeah, I know I don't remember all the numbers, but our Type 1s were what I would consider a big structure engine. Out here then they had to have at least 1,000 gallon per minute pump. I
Mhm.
think it had to have a deck gun on it. It had to carry at least 500 gallons of water, and then it had to have a certain complement of hose. And I really don't remember. It was like 1,000 feet of supply line.
Mhm.
We ran 3 inch and mostly 3 inch and 4 inch, mostly 3 inch for our supply line. But we also, I mean, the reasons like we might not run 6 inch where a city department would is when you're up some hill somewhere, it takes a lot of water just to fill that damn 6 inch line.
Oh yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
so we didn't necessarily. I mean, other departments around us that were more like I'm going to call city or more like small city departments, they
Correct.
might run 6 inch. Like I ran over in Sebastopol for 8 years. I volunteered with them as well, and they ran 6 inch. But they were on paved streets 99% of the time.
Correct.
Where
Yes.
paved like city streets on blocks. Where out here we're on some little goat trail that if you go off it, you could tumble a few hundred yards before you come to rest at the bottom.
Correct. Correct. And for me, being in a volunteer department in New York, we used to run 5 inch,
Okay.
and 5 inch, like you said, takes a lot of water to get that hose going. And if you're going up, a good incline, it takes a lot of pressure to build that up to draft that. So
It does. And you're right. I think those locals were actually running 5 inch. I said 6 inch, but I think they were running 5 inch now that you say that.
yeah, and if I'm not mistaken now, I think they are pushing towards 6 inch for a supply line.
Okay.
And because all the hydrants here had adapters hooked to them for the speed connects,
Yeah, okay.
and which a speed connect is just two hooks. For
Yep.
anybody that doesn't know, it has two hooks on it. You set it into two channels, and it locks in, and it connects the two connectors together, and that's what would supply your water, versus trying to thread hoses together, which takes a longer period of time, especially when you need supply of water fast. Because, like you said, an engine, tier one engine, would have only 500 gallons of water, and when you're pumping 125 gallons per minute, you're going to run out of water real quick. So you got to be able to supply that water quickly.
Well, and those type one deck guns could flow up to 1,000 gallons a minute. So
Mm,
if you rolled in on a house and dumped your deck gun, you had 30 seconds of water. You know
correct.
what I'm saying? So it was one of those things. You better make sure you can get it with that, or it's not really a viable tool. Or you better have a lot of water right behind you, or you got to catch a hydrant coming in. You
Correct.
know.
Correct. Now, did you find that deck guns were more used for a quote unquote surround and drown, or did you find it more that the deck guns were helped to push the fire back to be able to get guys in?
No, I think for us it was more that surround and drown mentality.
Mm,
Like a warehouse fire, or if you had to go defensive because there was no way you were going to save the building. You know what I mean? And it
mm,
was a pretty good. It's not a 1,500 or 1,200 square foot home. If you've lost it, you've lost it. You know what I mean? And
correct.
at
Correct.
that point, you're probably wanting to use hoses if you have a house next to you that you don't want to catch fire. You
Mm,
know what I'm saying? So we tended to use them more on commercial stuff, and again, because water was always an issue for us, or a lot of times it was, um, we didn't use deck guns that much. Maybe half a dozen times a year or something like that.
yeah, and
Was
I didn't see deck guns used that often either. It was more of a situation, like you said, when it's you're there and it's too far, advanced to where
Right.
you couldn't get in, then you might as well just do it from the outside.
Yeah, or if it
And
was like the high school gym or something, a big building, then that would
correct,
be where it would come into play.
correct.
But you probably have a hydrant around that too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
So
out here, hydrants are out here, and they're popping up more and more, but they're not always readily available.
sure.
So, you know, for me, I live on a backcountry road, and for me, we have a water source down the road from us
Mhm.
that they could supply from, but for the most part, they don't have that water source available. And I'm
Sure.
sure you guys see the same thing with the hydrants. Where you're at is that there's not a lot of hydrants available at all times.
Yeah, and it's kind of like you're saying, as they're building, little subdivisions here and there, they're starting to pop up a little more. Um,
Absolutely.
and there's, I would, and I don't even know if this number's right, but I would venture to say we have them in, I don't know, 50% of our area. Uh,
Okay.
and I might be totally off on that, but I know we got a lot of areas that don't have them too.
Correct. And from my area that I'm in right now, I
Mhm.
would say at least 25% has hydrants, and 75% doesn't.
Yeah.
But for this little community that I'm in, not community, but my street, I should say, we
Right.
have a viable water source down the road from us that has, up to million gallons of water that they could draft from. So,
Okay. Well, that's
it'd be a draft situation here.
sure.
And for everybody who's in here and, to expand on the draft situation, drafting is where well, Paul, would you give us a little explanation on drafting?
Oh, yeah. So drafting is where you have a large diameter hard hose. It doesn't, it's not pliable, and you generally try to get it into one of the big fittings that's near the eye of the pump, and you stick the other end in the water source itself, and you actually suck the water like out of the pond, the creek, the lake, whatever it is you're running, and you suck it out of there and into the fire truck, and then the pump pumps it on out to wherever you're trying to get it, basically.
Now, for people that don't know, it would you just stick that hose into the water without anything? You just drop
No,
it
no.
in, or would
Yeah,
you
it
put
definitely
like a
it'd have a strainer
strainer?
on the end. Yeah, it'd have a strainer on the end because you don't
Okay,
want to be sucking rocks and branches and stuff like that into the eye of your pump, or you're pretty likely going to destroy it.
okay. And
Fish, whatever it might be.
were strainers, just screwed on the end, or was there floating ones, or is there all different types, or is it just
I think there's all there. I think there are different types. Our strainers were screwed on the end, but oftentimes, you would be floating them because you didn't want that to just lay on the bottom in the mud, or you'd just be sucking a bunch of mud up there.
correct?
Did you
Thank
guys
you
ever
for
run any floato pumps?
Loto pumps. I'm not
Floato
really
pumps.
sure. I'm not sure because I
So,
never really got into the whole pump thing.
mhm.
I did run pumps, don't get me wrong. I have ran pumps and supplied water and stuff like that, but I don't remember. Good evening, Aaron. I don't remember what type of pump they were.
so
And to piggyback on what you were saying about the strainers and sticking them in the water, and welcoming everyone, just so everybody is aware of what we're talking about. We're talking about firefighting and no, no, you're good, Aaron. I appreciate you stopping in. Brown Water Club, I appreciate you stopping in. Also, everybody else in here tapping the screen, sharing the live, I appreciate you. Um, we're going over hunting. Or Hunting Paw is a veteran of fire service for 27 years, and we're just going over some of the stuff and explaining what some of the stuff is and what types of stuff they use for certain fire companies, and or excuse me, and thank you for the heart, me. I appreciate you. Also, to go over types of strainers and strainers that are used for drafting water. So, back to what I was going to say was that we used a lot of floating strainers if we knew, like, if it was like a pond or a swamp or something like that. We would have a screw on type of strainer, but it also had like a U shaped solid air filled solid um, structure on the top of it, so it would just float on the top of the water versus
gotcha.
having to use a ladder in the water and the strainer
Oh,
sit on the ladder.
right. There you go. So that floato pump we used them a lot in wildland, especially if you were on structure protection. For you could throw it in a pool,
Okay.
and it was maybe, I'm gonna guess, 3.5 feet long and maybe, I don't know, 2 feet wide, and it was like a floating buoy or whatever you want to call it around the outside, and then
Mm-hmm.
it had like a gas powered, maybe like a, let's say, like a lawnmower engine with a pump on the bottom, and it
Okay.
would float in a pool, and the pump was below it, and it would suck water, and it'd have like an 1.5 inch coupler on it, and so you could run a single 1.5 inch line off of that, from a pool or a pond or whatever. Same kind of thing, but on a much smaller scale, but something you could pack into somebody's backyard if they had a pool back there to draw
Okay.
out of,
Okay.
or
So similar to that, we would have a low level suction,
okay,
which looked like a metal tray
okay,
that had bolts in it that kept the pump. No, the strainer head,
hmm
the strainer head about maybe an inch off that metal plate, and
okay,
then you could drop that into any kind of water source, and it
I
would
got you.
keep it up off the bottom. So we could use that in pools. We could use that in basically a puddle if you really needed to, and the puddle was pretty deep or large enough. You could just set that in there, and it would suck it down to that inch much of water to be able to supply an engine with.
And so was that just like you were drafting, where you were using the eye of the pump? You were using the engine pump to suck that water out. Got
Yes,
it. Okay.
yes. So we would use that low level strainer to
I
set
got you.
it down and then just suck from the engine. We
Got
we
you.
didn't have we had portable trash pumps where you could start them up. All right, Aaron, you could start them up and it would suck out of like a pool or something like that with an inch and a half line, and
Okay.
then that would supply your truck if you needed to. But for the
Got you.
most part, we tried to use the hard suction lines, which are the 4.5, 5 inch, whatever it was,
Sure.
though, because you get more amount of water in a faster amount of time. So
Yeah. Definitely in a hurry, you get it. You
yeah,
know,
for sure.
the one other thing that we did that was probably one of my favorite things is we did water rescue too. Um,
Okay.
and because we have a river that runs through our district that would flood, and so we had Zodiac and just some regular John boats with motors on them, and we did a lot of training. We also ran like sea-doos for pulling people out when our
Okay.
river would get up high and people wouldn't get out in time and they'd be stuck in their house, and so
Correct.
we did a lot of that too, which that was pretty fun because none of the chiefs ever wanted to be out there, so you would get away from a lot of people watching what you were doing.
Hmm. Correct. See, now you guys use sea-doos. We used inflatable boats for water
Okay,
rescues
gotcha.
that were, they had the hard hull and then the
Right.
inflatable tubes on the outside.
Yep.
Thank you for the puppies.
We
Um,
had one of those. We had one that was a Zodiac brand IRB. Same thing,
okay.
hard bottom with rubber tube outside.
Thank you for reaching level 10, Aaron, and no problem. Thank you for stopping in. Uh, we use those or we use rowboats. So
Okay.
not necessarily a rowboat, but the rowboat type with an
Like a
engine on
John
it
boat.
to like a
Yeah,
John boat. There
yeah.
you go. We use
That's what
those
exactly.
and we would just do that type of stuff. I remember we had a historical flood in my area and it got to the point where we had to hurry with no boats or anything like that, and we were up to our neck in floodwater, just carrying people out of their homes if they couldn't get out themselves
Sure.
and getting them to the first aid squad or the engine and having the engine transport them further up out of the area of the flood. So it's crazy to see the difference, but
Sure.
not a difference in the different areas, from the West Coast to the East Coast.
Yeah, a lot of it are the same. The way you're putting the wildland fire out is the same. I don't think anybody's got anything special on that. You know what I mean?
Correct. Correct.
Maybe some hose complements are different, or the way you store your hose, or you know,
Mm,
we happen to run hose packs. A lot of departments would roll their hose and tie it together, where you would just throw the hose on your back, and you would leave two loops that were like your shoulder straps.
correct.
But you were doing the same thing. You were laying hose, chasing a
Correct.
wildfire somewhere.
We use high rise packs.
Okay.
And basically, what it is just, say 50 foot or 100 foot of hose that
Hmm.
has a longer handle on it. So if you wanted to throw it over your shoulder, you could. But it was
Right.
also meant for you just to pick up with your hand and go.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it would be they called it high rise packs for a lot of the because it was after the New York City Fire Department, they would
Right.
have high rise packs to be able to go up stories of buildings and drop
Right.
hose as they were going up if they needed
Gotcha.
to, and or
This,
to get up to the standpipes, in the upper floors to hook to. They'd have extra hose to hook to the standpipes if they're only say 100 foot or 50 foot of hose in the standpipe itself,
right.
and they had the fire department connection on the outside of the building where they could
Right.
charge water to the building. What's up, brother? How you doing, Ryan? And that would charge the building full of water
Right.
to all the standpipes. So this way there wasn't stagnant water in there and having to drain it out in the wintertime and all of that.
Sure.
So do you guys did you ever notice that in any of your buildings, or did you not have buildings where they needed to do that?
Not really. We didn't. We don't. I mean, we might have had a couple of two-story buildings. We didn't have here out in this part of the country. We mostly single-story stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Some commercial, that might have been sprinklered that you would come in and tie an engine to. Same thing. There was a fire department connection outside the building. You'd roll up to it, tie into it, and start, pressurizing the system.
Mm-hmm.
So that the same concept was there, but we didn't have high rises. You know what I mean? We would be
Correct.
doing that to pump a sprinkler system or something like that.
Okay. Okay.
Now that doesn't mean that I mean, we have a local cities that have high rises that are only 8 or 10 miles away. You know what
Correct.
I'm saying? But out where we are in the country, we just didn't have any of that.
I want to circle back to the training portion of it. Did you guys do a lot of live burns, structurally
Every
set up structure with like say pallets or, and do extrication or firefighter extrication drills and or, window extrications or anything like that when you were in the service?
We did, yeah, for sure. We did a couple of different things. Anytime, somebody, I mean, every so often, you'll get a house that's going to be torn down, and we would always work hard at trying to burn that house down for the person. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because just like what you're saying, you start in the back bedroom, you stack some pallets in there for a fire load,
Mm-hmm.
close the rest of the house up, throw some go-go juice on it on the pallets, and then you start having guys come in the front door, crawl in, down, get the door open, put it out, and maybe you get 3 or 4 burns out of that room before the sheetrock was compromised, and you didn't wanted to try to get use of the whole house before it got into the attic, and then just became a more of an exterior attack kind of thing. And then we also that one big city I was telling you about next to us had a 4-story training tower with a
Mm-hmm.
burn room in the bottom. And so, we would go over there, I would say maybe 2 times a year and drill with them and using their facility. Um, and then, yeah, they would have like their ladder trucks out there and, we'd practice. Our department here locally did not have a ladder, didn't have a truck, but the small city that I volunteered for 8 years, we had a truck down there.
Okay.
So we got some access to, being on a truck, doing truck stuff.
Now, have you ever experienced a flashover trailer where you had to they taught you about flashovers or anything like that?
That burn room at the city department, we
Mm.
did that. You know,
Okay.
so
That
yeah,
that's that flashover simulator is a wild simulator for sure.
that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean I've
How
seen
hot is
some
hot?
guys. Oh yeah, it is extremely hot.
Yeah.
We had a guy in our department who used to run a helmet cam
Mhm.
and post stuff on YouTube and for his own personal,
Okay.
viewing and show other people and stuff. But his camera melted in there, and they took a thermal imaging camera, which I'll explain a little about the thermal imaging camera. the thermal imaging camera we would take into structure fires when we would see that the fire looks like it's out, and then run it around the area to see if there's any hot spots in the walls, in the ceiling,
Sure.
any of that area, to make sure we're not leaving with hot spots still going. And they registered the heat in the flashover trailer at 1,000 degrees.
I believe that.
And turnout gear, I don't. I mean, I'm sure you know that, Paul, but other people, turnout gear is only rated for 800 degrees.
Yeah. I saw, firemen get burned, not even stand up, but like, from being on all fours, moving through a building, just sitting up, just like bottom of your ears, this kind of spot right here was easy to get uncovered, even though you had your breathing apparatus on, and you had your Nomex over the top, and your little flaps down on your helmet, and you had all that stuff in place. When you're moving around and doing stuff just kind of sometimes gets exposed.
Yeah. Actually, my brother ended up with a decent sized burn on the side of his face from the flashover trailer because it got so hot in there, and when it flashed over, his Nomex wasn't pulled up far enough around his mask. He ended up with a pretty decent burn on both sides of his face. But it's just part of the job, as they say.
And when you do that once, that probably would never happen to him again in his lifetime.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you pick up on how important that little half an inch of skin is. That it's got to be covered.
Yeah, for sure. And they were telling me, like, because I wasn't available to do that flashover simulator, so they were telling me, like, it was so hot that their ears were red when they got out, and it stayed red for a couple of days, almost like a bad sunburn.
Sure. Yeah, so, I totally believe it.
Yeah. So let me ask you, was there a standard time frame to be able to have to, for your training and to be qualified for the fire department? Did they have a certain time frame that you had to have to be able to get all your gear on and your pack on your back?
Yeah, I think we were I think you had to be under 45 seconds. You could have your jacket on. You could have, your turnouts on, but no helmet. That would be mask. Nomex hood, helmet, mask, pack on, engaged breathing air, and gloves on.
Okay. See, now for us, we had to have, regular street clothes, t-shirt, shorts, whatever.
Oh.
Your regular street clothes, you had a minute and a half to get dressed, put your pack on, get the mask on, all of that. And if you didn't do it in a minute and a half, you got recycled, and you had to keep doing it until you could get it in order to be able to fight fire as an interior firefighter. Sure. As an exterior firefighter, you had a minute to get fully dressed from your street clothes with your shoes on. So you had to take your shoes off, get all your turnout gear on with your Nomex hood and your helmet, your gloves, all of that. And you had a minute to do it.
I feel like if you practice that a little bit, you should be able to do it. You know what I mean? Because I'm assuming you would be the same way. Your boots would be sitting there with your turnout pants pushed down around them, and your flop between them. You literally come up to them, flop the suspenders out, step into the boots, pull them up, and put them on. And then jacket, zip, or not zip, but we were hooks with Velcro. But
Yes, ours were too. Ours were Velcro and hooks.
Yeah.
I think the standards across the board with the turnout gear, for what the makeup is and how you wear it is, I think it's pretty much the NFA. I know NFPA standards across the board is supposed to be the same. So I know when I used to run calls, I would have my boots in my bunker pants already, pushed down, my straps over. So all I had to do was run up, throw my straps over it, basically jump in my boots, and then throw it up, and then just Velcro everything, throw my coat on.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that sounds pretty similar. I mean, for 25 or 27 years, I had a set next to my bed, right? Because
Wow.
volunteer side of things, I mean, literally they sat next to my nightstand, because, the pager would go off in the middle of the night, and that's the way you'd go out the door, just in your lower gear, your lower bunker gear.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you hop in your pickup and haul ass down to the firehouse and bail out on the front apron, race in, grab your jacket, your helmet, get on the engine, and down the road you'd go,
Correct. Welcome in, Louis. Thank you very much for stopping in. We're having a conversation with Hunt and Paul about volunteer fire service. So if anybody has any questions, you can ask in the chat if you want to. We've been trying to describe things that we think would be beneficial for everybody to know or would know what we are discussing. Louis, how are you? So, with the turnout gear, like you said, for us, like I would belong to 3 different departments, and from areas that I moved into. One department, you had to leave your gear at the department. Two of them, you had to leave your gear at the firehouse. At one, I was able to carry a bag that was in my car, so I would just have the bag and then unzip it when I get to the scene and hurry up, throw my gear on, and then go do what I got to do. Because we could respond to the scene with one company because it was a large area. I think it covered like 80 square miles or something like that was the one company I was with. And the other companies were in a smaller area, but one was a smaller area, one was a larger area, but it had 4 firehouses. So we would have to respond to the firehouse, get dressed, get on the truck, and then go to the scene. And as and recruitment for fire service is very low right now. And even when I left, 10 years ago, the recruitment was very low. So they more or less forced guys to show up at the firehouse because they needed the manpower to get the trucks out.
Sure. So we kind of had a modified version of that. We would have, a full set of turnouts at the firehouse, and then I would have like a second set of boots and bunker pants that I kept at home.
Okay.
And then we always kept. So our deal was you're supposed to go to the firehouse unless you're passing an accident, let's say, or something on the way to the firehouse. But that being said, if it was a vehicle fire, it didn't do you any good to stop because you couldn't do anything, right? So same kind of thing. They really wanted you to come to the firehouse. That would be optimal so that, like you say, you can get the engine out the door. And, anything that's on fire does you no good to be there by yourself unless you got an engine, you know what I mean?
Correct.
So we were kind of modified, and the longer you were in, the more they trusted you, the more flexibility you had in what you would do or could do, Like I always carried my own full set of wildland gear in my pickup. So,
Correct.
Because what I found is, a lot of times they'd start, in the afternoon when it was hot and windy or something like that, and I might be at work, so I could be coming from the next town over back to our town, which is like 8 miles up the road. And if I was going by that fire, the engine was going to be there because I was so delayed in getting there. So I could roll into scene and have everything I needed,
Correct.
Webbing, all the web gear, all that stuff.
Now, can you give a little description of what web gear what you're meaning by when you say web gear?
Yeah, so that's where we would carry other things you need for a wildland fire. By state law, and it's probably NFPA standard, you can't be on a wildland fire without a fire shelter or a shake and bake.
Okay.
So, we would always carry that big square pack on the back of your web gear that had your fire shelter in it. And then, like for me, myself, I would carry a hose clamp, like an alligator style hose clamp, so that if you were 800 feet up a a wildland hose lay and the hose ruptured, you could get in there and click that thing off until you could, get a new piece of hose to replace it.
Mm.
And then from there, I'm trying to think what else. We carried a couple other things, and I'm drawing blank. The hose clamp, that. Oh, it would have like a radio pouch on it. And then some of them, this was more personal, I think, preference. Some of them had like a small backpack, or you could have a water bladder on your back. And so it would be like a backpack without the backpack, without the big bag on it. Shoulder straps, you throw it on. It's got something to hold your radio, that kind of thing, just to hold things you need out there.
So I think that's where we differ a little bit from the East and West Coast.
Okay.
Is the East Coast, we never ran a fire shelter or a shake and bake, as you call it.
Oh, shit. Really?
We never ran those for brush fires and stuff, because if it got too bad, they would pull us out.
Oh, okay.
And welcome back. Well, hey Sean, how are you? I seen you jump in, buddy. So we would just run brush fighting gear. Brush fighting gear is basically like a denim material.
Yeah,
like coverall material, but it was thick. It wasn't. It might have been a little bit of Nomex mixed in with it, but it always felt like a almost like a Carhartt material on the outside, and it was about that thick, and that's what we would wear, and it was bright yellow.
Yeah,
and we had a construction hard hat type deal, and that was our brush gear, and that's what we would wear. Obviously, we would have, some guys would have radio holders, which is like a leather strap with a square box attached to it. You could drop your radio in it, and we carried everything by hand mostly. And if it was preference, guys would run a water bladder on their back, but majority of the time they would have ATVs running water up to where the fire was for guys.
All right,
so it was either ATVs or UTVs, whatever they could get to the scene. They would run that. Oh, I got to do this puzzle.
Yeah, that was the other thing. Before the days of water bladders, we ran a canteen on that.
Okay.
So like the old military, the green plastic canteen.
Mm-hmm.
We would run those. That would be also on the belt. Yeah, see, you would not. I mean, you'd get kicked straight off a wildland fire scene if you did not have a shake and bake on you. If you didn't have, you were not even allowed off the engine without one on. And in fact, an engineer, which this part to me was kind of stupid, but an engineer who's at the engine had to have that gear. You know what I mean? Who's not leaving the engine. But, I guess the thought was maybe somebody gets hurt and you have to run to go help them. I don't know. So
the fire could turn and then, come head towards the engine. Yeah. And they at least had to have that. So the shake and bake, if I'm I've only seen it in shows and movies with the shake and bake. Right. I'm assuming that's like a fire blanket or a fire tent that you can get underneath and you put it over yourself.
Yeah.
And that's what you're calling the shake and bake.
Yeah, it would be like a small one-man pointed little tent. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You'd pull it out, shake it open. It had, it would be like a, 6'6" tall little aluminum, it was metal on the outside, like a reflective material,
almost like a window reflector.
Yeah.
In your car.
It was silver, and it was a metallic. And then it had little straps in the corners, and you would hook your feet in the bottom two corner straps, and you'd use your hands to hold the front two down, just because that thing could just blow off you, with the wind that's created inside a fire. You'd need to make sure you were holding it down at the same time.
So now that you say that, with the wind and the fire, what would it be like, if you don't mind describing a little bit of what would it be like, or what would it feel like if you had fire behavior do that, where it would circle around you, or be underneath one of those blankets. Did you ever have a simulation done, or?
I don't recall. So I was lucky enough to never have to deploy one of those in 27 years.
For
Um,
sure, and I am happy that you never had to do that,
yeah, yes,
because that does a lot to you, for one. And just because they say it could protect you, they don't always protect you to the full potential
for
with
sure not.
anything.
For sure not. But it's better than the alternative. You know what I mean? At least kind
Absolutely.
of gave you a chance, I would say. But the first thing you would do is when it became clear that you were going to get overrun, you'd be looking for an open spot with your hand tool clearing the ground to try to get back down to bare dirt. So there's
Mhm.
nothing under your tent to burn. You know what I mean? It can't
Correct.
creep
Correct.
under. Um, the guys that I had talked to over the years that had deployed them and had gotten burned over, had said it was pretty noisy, really damn hot, and you really had to hang on to that thing. And you were eating a lot of smoke because there was still smoke and stuff that would come under the cracks of it.
Correct.
So you'd try to have your face down as close as you could to the ground, trying to find the coolest spot of air that you could. You know what I mean?
Correct. So would you say they described it as like a almost like a freight train flying over top of you?
Yeah, yeah, that's what I've heard. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah, that's
sounds
what
like
I've heard also.
yes, yeah. Lucky enough to never have to deploy, but um,
Correct.
it is really crazy, and I don't think a lot of people understand um, how much wind a fire creates itself. Uh,
Absolutely.
and as they start to get bigger, how they can change the weather in that area um, in that process.
So let me ask you, for people that don't know, and thank you for stopping in, everyone, with Bar Talks with Big. We're discussing fire service. Um, so did it get dark where the brush fires were? Like, did it from the smoke, or?
Oh yeah, yeah. It would definitely get dark for sure. Yeah, we in 2017 and 2019 we had some big fires like right here where we live. And
Mhm.
the during the day there would be no sunshine to be seen, and it would be like, just before dark kind of light. Like you might be able to see a little bit, but not very far, just because
Okay.
the smoke would get, so thick and so heavy that it would just block the light from the sun out, basically,
Okay.
you know.
So let me ask you. I know when I first started in the fire service, they used to tell me that a lot of the older guys would grow the big bussy mustaches, and that would be because prior to getting the SCBA, which is a self-contained breathing apparatus, for if people are not knowledge, don't know that's what they're called, they would use the big bushy mustache to keep a lot of the debris from going up their nose when they were in a fire. Have you heard the same thing?
I had not heard that. I heard you say that the other night when we were
Hmm.
chatting, but I had not heard that. You know what I'm saying? But
Okay.
it could make sense. I mean, on the wildland fires, we used to run handkerchiefs. You know what I'm saying? Uh,
Correct.
because we never ran SCBAs in wildland fires.
No,
So,
we don't hear either.
okay. So, um, there were these little masks you could buy that might have like a filter built into them, but I know they started becoming a little bit popular and they kind of died out because they were pretty restrictive. And
Hmm.
when you needed to exchange air because you were breathing heavily, you know, like breathing in a plastic bag or something, you were, they were pretty restrictive. Now, would it probably have been better for you? Maybe, you know,
Absolutely.
I'm
Absolutely.
not saying that. I mean, what I can say from the 27 years in the fire service is, I feel like in the earlier days, we did a lot of shit that they don't do nowadays, as far as protective gear and
Hmm.
backing out of stuff, and maybe for your own health. You know what I mean? But
Correct.
it's definitely morphed some over the last 30 and 40 years.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of change, you know, even from when I've spoke to a lot of the older members, and I've seen a lot of difference in the way, in the 14 years that I was in, the way they attacked fire and the way they, you know, proceeded with a lot of things. I noticed there was a lot, and the standards have changed a lot compared to when I first started, and I'm sure when you first started to now,
Sure.
that the procedures and standards have changed a lot in
Right.
that reasoning. I mean, not that I was instructed to, but I've gone to certain fires and not wore anything at all.
Yeah. No, I,
And I, you know, we all pay for it now. You
yeah.
know, don't get me wrong.
We did. I mean, I would say the first 15 years I was probably in, we mopped up structure fires with no SCBA on. Not saying it was smart, but that's what we did.
Correct.
You know what I mean?
Correct.
Would we do it again today? No, no, absolutely
No.
not. What you didn't
No.
realize is you were in the most toxic goddamn place you could be at that time because, you know, there's smoldering couch cushions and
Mm-hmm.
finish off the wall paneling and furniture that's burning. And I mean, you
Yeah,
know,
all the carcinogens that were in the
yeah,
air that we didn't realize when we were
yeah,
first getting into the fire service, or nor did they.
yeah,
That the smoldering stuff that we were mopping up, and or you know, just finishing off hot spots and just mounding stuff up or spreading stuff out, was actually more toxic to firefighters than it was doing any good.
yeah, for sure. That's a fact. But you know, the good news is they've figured most of that out, and hopefully they're protecting these guys uh, better now than we protected ourselves back then. You
For
know,
sure, for sure. And
so
I mean, you know, like I said, I've been out 10 years now, or a little over 10 years, and when I left, they were doing that, wearing they were wearing SCBAs to do cleanup and, you
sure,
know, just check for hot spots and stuff like that. And they were making guys no longer go back in without a mask on or
yeah,
without a tank, whatever.
right,
And it does work out for the better in the long run for the guys and gals. Let me rephrase that, because there is now more females joining the fire service, and you know, and it's great to see, because we need that. We need to be able to have more people across the board joining the fire service and being more active to help their community.
yeah, 10-4.
So
Good.
I don't. I is there anything that you are, have curiosity that you want to ask me about the East Coast, or I mean, I think I've covered a lot of stuff with you this evening.
Yeah, I feel like you've kind of, you know, said back to whatever questions you were asking what you guys did.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think the only when we first started in water rescue, again, it was 1986, and we had the largest flood we've ever had. And literally, there was no departments in our county that had ever done anything for water rescue. And our firefighters association literally went out, bought an IRB from a local boat shop and a motor on the second day of the fire, and we just went out and started doing it. And at that
Right.
point, we all only had wetsuits because most of us were abalone divers. And, you know, so you would take off, and, you know, the shit you don't think about again, you realize that after you do it for a while is dry suits are way better because, you know, when these cars start getting flooded, the fuel comes out of their fuel tanks, the oil comes out
Mm-hmm.
of their engines. It all ends up sitting right on top of the water. So, you know, you go in a wetsuit and you cross through that, and as that water gets between your suit and your body, it's got gas and oil in it. You know what I mean? And
Absolutely.
like 4 hours in, man, we all had rashes that were unbelievable. You know what I mean? But again, we just did it out of necessity, didn't know what we were doing in
Mm-hmm.
reality compared to, you know, what we learned in subsequent years. Um, so, you know, again, we did some stuff in hindsight that they don't do anymore these days, luckily, just for everybody's safety, because that shit can't be good for you, you know,
Absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely.
having that gasoline all over your body for hours on end. So,
Correct. and that stuff is petroleum based too. So
Yeah.
it just sits there and sits there and sits there until you wash it off with some kind of detergent or something.
Yeah.
But and back to even talking about the Nomex that you wear over your head or your turnout gear. We were required to wash our turnout gear if we were in a bad structure fire and our gear was dirty. We were required to wash it and dry it. And what people don't realize is that some guys would say, "Oh, it's still a little damp. It's fine. I'll just throw it on the rack." And you know, as we all know in the fire service, that if you say, "Yeah, well, I'll be good," next thing you know, you're going to need it in an hour.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's not that we were expecting it or wanting it to happen. That's just the way the law of physics work.
Well,
And a lot of guys didn't realize that wearing that little bit of damp turnout gear, were actually burning guys because it was boiling in their suit and it was
yeah,
burning their skins.
for sure.
So they made it to a point where we had to, if we were washing our gear, we had to have another set to
Gotcha.
use until the gear was completely dry.
Sure.
And we weren't allowed to, and we were told not to bring our gear into our house because of the carcinogens that are still in your gear. No
Yeah.
matter if you wash it or not, it's still in your gear, and then you're affecting your families. So when you were talking about the turnout gear pants being next to your bed, I kind of chuckled because I was like, man, that would have been great if I could have did that, because
Yeah.
it would have made my response time a little slower, but my react time would have been faster because I would have had.
Well, and I think your response time is faster as well because, you have to get out of bed, get dressed as a volunteer in some, sweats or whatever, get some sort of shoe on your foot where you could just step out of bed, step into your boots, pull them up, and you were out the door. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
then when you hit the firehouse, all you had to do is throw your jacket and your helmet on and you were going down the road. But
correct.
another thing, like you're saying about cleaning your gear, they've learned, the hard way. Because again, I mean, shit, we hardly washed shit. You would just hang it out and let it dry. You know what I mean? So you would
Yeah,
put on carcinogen loaded gear right back on top of yourself the next time you needed it. But that just wasn't on nobody's radar at the time. Not that anybody was opposed to it, just nobody was
correct.
thinking about it.
Yeah,
Until you start
absolutely.
seeing these guys coming up with cancer left and right, and then you're like, okay, well, there you go. That's probably the reason, or part of the reason.
That and I was also told by one of our instructors, because we had an instructor who was the president of our firehouse. He also told us about a story that a guy had turnout gear that was completely dirty, black in a lot of areas, and from carcinogens from a fire.
Hmm.
And his turnout gear actually caught on fire
Eh,
because of how much carcinogens were in it.
gotcha.
And
Okay.
I was like, wow, it shocked me at first when I first learned about it, because I was like, what would cause that? And then I got thinking about it more and more. You think about it, if you go to a car fire, the rubber that you're coming in contact with, that's in your gear no matter what. The charcoal wood, the couch cushions, any of that stuff that you come across, and it's just stuffed into the fibers of your
Yeah.
gear, and it's just compounding and compounding, and that turned out to be a hazard for yourself,
Yeah. For sure.
more ways than one.
Yeah.
So
Well, we've gotten a lot smarter.
for sure,
You know.
for sure.
So
But does anybody in the chat have any questions or anything that they heard that they want an explanation on, or is there anything they're interested in to ask us or ask my guest here, Mr. Paul? We'll turn it over to the chat to see if they have any questions or anything like that.
all right.
Welcome in, Lena Jenkins. Thank
And
you
then
for
I
stopping in.
I probably have to run on you in about 9 minutes for a little while.
Yeah, no,
But
that's fine. I'm probably gonna end up wrapping this up. If there's no questions, then we're gonna wrap this up.
all
We've
right,
been at it for a little bit now,
sure.
and thank you very much for being a guest on Bar Talks with Big
Yeah,
and
had a great
being
time.
our very first guest to the first episode.
All right.
Do you get paid well, or what was the retirement plan? For East Coast, we got a $200 tax break in the volunteer department, and we have primarily volunteer departments. There is a few paid departments, and the paid departments get paid pretty well, but the volunteer departments, you get grants for your year. You could, and taxpayers paid for your stuff. And for us as a volunteer firefighter, we would get a $200 tax break every year on our taxes, and we had a life insurance, and that's really about it.
Yeah, on the West Coast, it depended by department. I mean, our department gave you a $2 per call reimbursement. And, that was like, oh, that's for the clothes you destroyed while you're doing it, or, that kind of thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Zero retirement. Um, Now, there's been some changes, but some other departments around us were like $6 a call you might make. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or $8 a call. We just weren't, our department, there was not enough money in it that it was ever about the money. You know what I'm saying?
Correct.
Nothing like a full-time paid job, full-time paid fire job. You know what I mean?
Correct. Now, let me rephrase what I said, because as I was leaving the fire service, Aaron, yes, we both were volunteer. Um, as I was leaving the department, they started doing LOSAP, which is like a retirement. They
Okay.
would they would pay you. You had to do so many points a year
Okay.
to maintain the retirement status, and you
Nice.
had to have 20 years in, and they gave you like $250 a month as a
Oh,
retirement
oh, that's cool.
towards the end of it. So I think I got like 3 years maybe,
Okay.
but you had to have the 20 years in order to collect off of it
Got it. Okay.
for the volunteer departments.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and they may do something like that now, but like you, I've been out for a little bit now, so I don't know what
Right.
change transpired. Um, I know since our department became, um, it got sucked into like a 10 department conglomerate. I last I've heard, we don't have many volunteers left, which you could kind of see coming because full-time paid and volunteer can be different in the way that you deal with people as far as
Mm-hmm.
the volunteer versus the paid guy. Because you know a lot of volunteers, for that too, you're not in it for the money, so
Right.
um, it can be harder to arm wrestle you into something they want you to do that you don't want to do. um, and I think that's what started happening because the chiefs in that bigger department, they were all paid guys. What made our department great for the years I was in it is our chief was a volunteer when he was young.
Mm-hmm.
So he understood what it took to be a volunteer. And so we had paid and volunteer staff, but he could deal with them both. You
Right.
get a chief from, a big city department that hasn't dealt with volunteers, and they're really regimented on what the MOUs say, that how things are going to be done. You know what I mean?
Correct.
And
Correct.
and that's great when you're getting a paycheck. You know what I mean? But
Mm-hmm.
maybe not so much when you're not.
No, I agree. And like you were saying with the volunteer, you weren't doing it for the retirement or the pay.
Yeah,
The tax break. We were
yeah,
doing it more for helping the community and helping people in our community, and that was it. And to answer the question that Aaron said, so you both had other full-time paid jobs.
yes.
Yes, Aaron. And at times when I was in the fire service, I also had a full-time job and I ran my own business. So I did both on top of being a volunteer.
Yeah.
and it became more like a job because of how many hours that we had to give to the fire service that I ended up having to leave
Right.
because it was just too much to try to make sure I made my classes, my refreshers, the drills, the calls, the
Right.
meetings, and then also work and run my business at the same time.
And have a family.
Correct. And have a family, absolutely.
And that's where volunteers are becoming less and less because there's so many classes they say you need to have, you probably do, but if you don't have anybody trained to help and a big event happens, you guys could be in a lot of trouble.
Correct. Correct. I mean, I've seen like smaller departments have an influx most recently of members, but
Right.
I've also seen it where we went from 55 members down to 30 and
Sure.
then have a couple join here and there because people are saying, well, I can't give the hours that they require
Right.
to for me to be there.
Right.
So, but
Yeah. It's
I know you have to run, and
yeah.
I don't want to keep you holding. We've been at this for an hour and a half, and I want to thank you very much for being on the first
Yeah. That's
episode
good.
of Bar Talks with Big, and I
Yeah.
appreciate
That's
you.
good.
Thank you very much, sir. And
You bet.
hopefully we can have a conversation again. And thank
Yes.
everybody in the chat for being here. Next week, I am going to have another episode, but we are going to change the time from 7 to 8:30 because I know it's harder for myself and other people to try to get in here at 7 o'clock. Um, because I had to cut my daughter's party short today just to get in here, and I thought about it a little bit more this morning, and I think I'm going to start doing them at 8:30
Good. Nice.
and be a little bit later for everybody to be able to get everything they need to get done and then be able to be on here to have a chat with everybody.
All right. Well,
So
good. You know what next week is about yet?
next week, I'm going to have a nurse who's going to be on the show,
Oh,
and
nice.
we're going to discuss, nursing and the first 5 to 6 episodes of this show. I'm going to do first responders and military. So I want to
Excellent.
try to get all those in. And then after, I am going to have a special guest towards the end. It's going to be a pair of people that I want to get on here.
Oh,
And
beautiful.
then from there, I want to, I got to set the rest of those up. But for the next 4 or 5 episodes, I'm going to have it all set up and ready to go.
Good. All right. Well, I'll be bouncing back around here. I just got a few things I got to get taken care of. Aaron, great to see you in here. And thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you for taking the time out to discuss all this and, think about some of these things that we try to put behind us. And,
Yeah, 10
you
4
know,
for sure.
and
Yeah.
I appreciate that a lot. And,
Good.
and I appreciate everybody stopping in, tapping the screen. We're up to 4.1K likes and the shares and, just asking the questions, just chatting in here.
Yeah.
So
Excellent.
we will
All right.
see everybody soon. Bar Talks with Big will be back next Saturday at 8:30, and we will have a nurse on the show. In your advertising includes a topic like that. I will. I will. This was the first episode. I really appreciated Paul for willing to be the first person to be on the show in the first episode, and
All
we're
right.
going to evolve from here and move
All right.
on.
Well, hey, when you make it big, don't forget me, okay?
I will. I won't forget anybody. I will not forget anyone.
All right. Awesome. All right,
I
man.
appreciate everyone.
Have a good night.
All right,
I'll catch you.
you too. I'll
All
catch
right.
you soon. Thank
See
you,
you guys.
everyone, for stopping in
All
and
right.
being here and just making this show happen. And I appreciate every one of you. Thank you for the gifts, Aaron, and everybody else who has gifted, tapped the screen, shared the live, and came in here and talked with us. I will see everybody soon, and I will be back around probably on live shortly. I'm just going to go get a couple things done. Talk to you all soon. If I don't make it back tonight, I will be on tomorrow. Catch you guys later.